everyone. Welcome to see you. Thank you to IDEA and to the Center for Global Education to invite me to give a short presentation on one of the articles in issue 35 of Policy and Practice. That article is based on a longer research report. I'll take you through it in the next 10 minutes, but there will be a lot more detail both in the article and in the research report, the link for which I will give you later on. Let me start off by sharing my screen with you, see if that works, and take you through a few slides from the beginning. So the question of this particular article and the question of the research was, to what extent does the international development sector in Ireland, and to what extent does the development education sector in Ireland engage the public with what is our most important economic system that is in operation, both locally, nationally, and globally? That research was based primarily on Ireland. It used a few kind of examples from elsewhere in Europe as well. It drew on relatively limited range of source materials, focused very much on a number of selected Irish international development organizations and development education organizations, the list of which you can see here. They were selected mainly for their, if you like, their public recognition. They're well known in Ireland. They are important in terms of their contacts with the public, but they only form a small selection of the international development and development education organizations that operate in the country. I've only also drawn on some examples from outside the civil society organizations that are concerned with international development and development organization, and also on some organizations elsewhere in Europe, like the European Commission and Concord. So that was the scope, if you like, of the piece of work that led in the end to the article in issue 35. My work was very much based on an assumption, on a bias, if you like. A bias that development education, or indeed, if you like, global citizenship education, involves an educational process. It's to do with inquiry, it's to do with discussing findings, it's to do with reflecting on what people, what learners learn, and it's to do with their responses to their findings, to their education. Purpose is to enable people to participate in development, locally, nationally, globally. But that participation needs to be based on a critical awareness and an understanding of different economic, social, political, environmental systems and processes. So that was my starting point, if you like. That's my bias in organizing the research and how I approach development education and the engagement of the public in the work that we're concerned with. I've also made a few assumptions in terms of saying that if the international development sector, which is concerned with issues of poverty and inequality and injustice at a global scale, but also at a local scale, if they really want to address, to overcome those issues, they need to look at the root causes of those issues. And they need to give public attention to processes that underpin those injustices, that inequality, that poverty. If they don't do that, the international development sector is, tempering a little bit at the margins, but it's not really solving the underlying problems of poverty and inequality and injustice. Similarly, from a development education, or if you like, prefer that term, global citizenship education point of view, that education needs to incorporate attention to system thinking as well, particularly economic system thinking, if its work is to be effective in really exploring development, or indeed in exploring global citizenship. You cannot avoid thinking about and developing educational approaches about economics. So that led then on to two kind of key questions that form the basis for the piece of work that I did for the Center for Global Education. One was, do the international development and development education sectors actually challenge, question the existing economic system? And secondly, do they engage the public in exploring that system and exploring the root causes of poverty, inequality, injustice? So those were the key kind of starting points, really, that form the basis for this piece of research and the article. I've used in that very much a kind of thought of systems thinking. Systems thinking in the sense that if you look at individual issues or individual phenomena to do with poverty, to do with inequality, it's worthwhile to put those in a broader context. It's that context that enables you to provide an explanation of why the individual issues, why the individual phenomena exist, and why those individual kind of challenges exist. It tries to give an explanation for their existence. It also helps in assessing, actually in trying to develop some understanding of that development is very complex. It's got many different layers to it, both personally, both socially, both in terms of different processes that are going on. But systems thinking can help you in understanding that complexity. Thirdly, systems thinking, I think, helps to develop a view of the world that there are multiple relationships. The development is not easy. We may identify an issue and say, this is the solution to that issue, but systems thinking helps you to think through that, yeah, actually that particular kind of example of providing a solution may be worthwhile, but there are factors that may affect it. Finally, systems thinking, I think, helps to support the development and exploration of alternative ideas, alternatives to the current kind of system that is operating in the world, in this case, to do with economics. What I used for that kind of system thinking is an overview, an approach called the development compass rose. You're probably familiar with the compass rose, north, south, east, west. But in this particular development compass rose, north is replaced with nature, to do with issues around the natural environment and how that natural environment is being used. East is replaced with economy, issues around how we produce things, how we consume things, how we transport things, trade them, how we use labor and how we combine capital with labor to produce things, and so on. South is used in, or translated as society, issues to do with how we organize ourselves as human beings in communities, in national societies, or indeed global societies, and questions around that. While West is replaced with who decides, issues to do with power, questions around how power is used and who has got the power, who makes an impact on decisions. So that was the systems kind of analysis that I used very much for looking at the information that I gathered. Now, the attention in the international development sector, I first of all looked at. In Ireland, something like 60 non-governmental development organizations operate. And on top of that, you have Irish Aid, and also you have the European Union that have significant kind of impact on the international development sector in Ireland. But very few of those, by the vast majority, although they do identify the issues they want to work on, they do not give a coherent analysis of why those issues are important and indeed why those issues exist. So the analysis of the reasons for the existence of issues is very often very scant or even totally absent. And the interest in a particular issue is very much
Harm-Jan,
yeah.
Sorry to flag that you have 3 minutes left.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. But there are some examples that I found from the information to do with poverty and hunger, to do with inequality, to do with the effects of austerity, to do with industrial agriculture. From that, you get a kind of a sense, from that analysis of those documents, you get a sense that the NGDOs conclude that priority in development is given to individual initiative without significant state involvement. That the state focuses on regulating business markets to operate in a fairly free kind of manner. Thirdly, that the influence of civil society on economic affairs is very limited or indeed actively discouraged. And finally, that capital is very often the deciding factor, not the benefit to society, but a benefit to making more money. Findings from within the NGDO analysis say that on an economic level, it leads to an increasing income and wealth inequalities, growing poverty. Returns to shareholders are being prioritized over returns to workers and the wider public. And privatization of public services, for example, in health and education, forms a key part of that economic system in which we operate. That has consequences for society. Reduced social society input, for example, the use of the environment leads to reduced access by poorer community to natural resources, leading to further poverty and migration, and politically, very often an unwanted assumption that marketization and austerity measures are required to address periods of economic downturn. Within development education, you find that development education gives very little attention to root causes. There appears to be a lack of explorations of economic processes, a lack of explorations of system thinking, and where it does take place, research in Ireland suggests that many resources give a very simplistic analysis of the issues that the resources are dealing with, the education resources. Very often that work within development education has got a rather short-term focus rather than explaining the longer-term fundamental change that is needed to overcome poverty or inequality. And typically, particularly in the international development sector, but also to some extent in the development education sector, the focus is on campaigning rather than on education, the point that I started earlier on. So the main conclusions from this are: one, among selected NGDOs, only a small minority challenges the dominant economic paradigm. Secondly, the development sector gives very little attention to engaging the public in exploring the systemic nature of poverty, inequality, and injustice. And thirdly, the development education sector also gives very little education attention to explorations of economic systems and the root causes. Now, that then leads me to the question, so what? Should attention to economic processes, systems, and root causes be an important part of development education, and international development? And if so, how can it be developed? So that's my key kind of finishing point, really, from this small piece of research, where you can find more information in this particular kind of these publications, both the research and the policy and practice issue. I'll put those links in the chat box. But that's it from me. Thank you.